Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Podcast. I'm Emma, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host, John.
Hey everyone, it's fantastic to be back with you. Today we're diving into a topic that has sparked debates for centuries. Astrology. Is it a true science, or is it all just a bunch of fiction? We're going to explore the facts, the myths, and uncover the truth behind astrology.
But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the Deep Dive Podcast and hit that notification bell so you never miss one of our deep dives into fascinating topics. We've got some amazing episodes lined up for you.
And if you enjoy this episode, make sure to like and share it with your friends. We appreciate all your support.
All right, let's jump into the world of astrology, fact or fiction. Let's find out.
Sounds like a plan. Where should we start?
Well, the Al Jazeera article takes us way back, like ancient civilizations back. It talks about the Aztecs, who believed they could influence the weather by, get this, offering sacrifices to their gods.
I mean, that's kind of understandable in a way. You know, wanting to control the forces of nature, especially back then when survival depended on it.
Right, and even early philosophers, like Aristotle and Theophrastus, were trying to make sense of these celestial events, trying to figure out if there was some order to it all.
So it wasn't just about gods and myth. There was also a philosophical and intellectual side to it.
Exactly. But it wasn't all science and logic either. The article also talks about Nostradamus, that French astrologer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nostradamus, famous for his predictions about the future.
Some people say he predicted some pretty major historical events, like Henry IV becoming the King of France.
That's pretty wild. Do you think there's any truth to those predictions, or is it just coincidence?
Maybe it has something to do with that concept of karma. The idea that our actions in the present shape our future experiences.
That's interesting. Like a cosmic cause and effect kind of thing?
It's a key principle in Eastern religions like Buddhism and Hinduism.
Right. So maybe this fascination with knowing the future, maybe it's a way of trying to understand or even control those karmic consequences.
Makes you think. Okay, so we've established that people have been looking to the stars for guidance for a long time. But how is astrology different from astronomy?
Yeah, good question. I mean, they both deal with stars and planets, right?
They do. But the Huntington News article explains it really well. Astronomy is a natural science. It's about observing and measuring the celestial objects themselves, their composition, their movement, that sort of thing.
Okay, so it's like a very factual, evidence-based field.
Exactly. Astrology, on the other hand, takes those observations and tries to link them to human affairs, like personality traits or events.
Right, and that's where the scientific community gets a bit skeptical, I guess.
They argue that astrology doesn't follow the scientific method, the rigorous process of testing hypotheses and gathering evidence.
It's more about interpreting symbols and making connections based on belief rather than on proven facts.
That's what critics say, anyway. But some astrologers would argue back that their practice does have roots in science. The article mentions Shelley Holloway and Laura Campagna, who seem to think so.
Interesting. What do they say?
Well, Holloway says that astrology was invented alongside science and math. It was really our first science.
Bold statement.
And Campagna points out that ancient civilizations used astrology for important decisions, like choosing the founding date of Baghdad.
Okay, so they're saying it's not just some made-up thing. It has a historical and intellectual basis.
Right. But even if it was used for those purposes in the past, does that necessarily make it valid today?
Good point. We've come a long way in our scientific understanding since then.
Oh, okay. So the debate about whether astrology is a science is still going strong. But let's move on to something a little more relatable. Zodiac signs and all those personality stereotypes. Geminis are talkative, Scorpios are intense, that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, everyone's heard those. Where do those ideas even come from?
The basic idea is that the position of the sun in a particular zodiac sign at the time of your birth influences your personality traits. Like Geminis are associated with Mercury, the planet of communication, which is supposedly why they're known for being chatty.
Interesting. So it's all based on the planets.
That's the theory, at least. But how much truth is there to these stereotypes?
Good question. Does anyone actually buy into that stuff?
You'd be surprised. We got some really mixed opinions from high school students, actually. Some, from Crimson News Magazine and the Franklin Post, said their signs are spot on, while others were like, nah, this is bogus.
So even within a generation, you get those who believe and those who don't.
Totally.
Yeah.
A lot of the skepticism from students actually mirrors what the scientific community says. They haven't found any real evidence to support the idea that planets influence our personalities.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, Personality is so complex. It's shaped by your genes, your upbringing, your experiences, not just what the stars were doing when you were born.
Right. But then you have things like the CoStar app, which has millions of users. People swear by their horoscopes. What do you make of that?
Honestly, that's where I think confirmation bias might be playing a role. We tend to focus on the times when a horoscope gets something right and forget about all the times it's wrong.
So it's not necessarily that the horoscopes are accurate, but that we're interpreting them in a way that confirms what we already believe.
Exactly. And a lot of those general horoscopes, like the ones you find in newspapers or apps, they're written in such a vague way that they could apply to almost anyone.
It's like those personality quizzes that tell everyone they're a unique snowflake.
Exactly. They offer these broad descriptions that people can easily project themselves onto.
But what about personalized horoscopes based on your birth chart? Aren't those supposed to be more accurate?
Even those face the same criticisms from the scientific community. There's just no evidence to back it up, and there's still that potential for confirmation bias.
Okay, so we've talked about the origins of astrology, the debate over its scientific validity, those zodiac stereotypes and horoscopes. But why are we so drawn to these predictions in the first place? Why this fascination with knowing the future?
I think the core anecdote is really interesting. One user talks about turning to astrology after going through some really tough times. It was a way to seek comfort and a sense of control in a world that felt chaotic.
It's like that question the Al Jazeera article asks. Why does everyone crave to uncover the secrets of their tomorrow? It's almost like we have this deep-seated need for certainty, even if it's just an illusion.
Like we can handle the present if we just knew what the future holds, right?
Maybe. The Al Jazeera article also mentions this quote from Wayne Dyer that you can't fully understand something just by reading about it. You have to experience it for yourself. Maybe that's part of the appeal of astrology. It's an experience, a way of engaging with the unknown.
So it's not just about the predictions, it's about the journey, the process of exploring those ideas.
That's one way to look at it. But wouldn't Eckhart Tolle disagree with this focus on the future? He's all about the power of now, right?
Right. He argues that dwelling on predictions takes us away from the present moment, which is the only time we have any real power to make choices.
So it's this tension between the allure of knowing the future and the importance of being present in the moment.
Yeah, it's a tough balance.
We want to know what's coming, but we also need to focus on what we can control right now.
So we've just scratched the surface of this complex topic. Where do we go from here?
I think we've laid a good foundation by exploring the history and some of the basic concepts. Now it's time to dive deeper into the specific claims of astrology, the evidence, and the different viewpoints on its validity.
Sounds like a plan. I'm ready if you are. So let's talk about this idea that the planets and stars at the moment of your birth somehow determine your personality.
Okay, yeah. It's an intriguing concept, but I gotta say, I can see why scientists are a little skeptical.
Right. I mean, they argued there's no known way planets could actually influence us in such a specific way.
Like no cosmic force beaming down and shaping who we are.
Exactly. Personality is so much more complex than that.
Genetics, environment, experiences, it's all a big mix.
Right. To think it all boils down to where planets happen to be when you were born, it does seem, well, a bit simplistic, right?
Yeah, like overly simplistic, even a bit far-fetched.
Exactly. But, I mean, some people swear their zodiac sign just fits them perfectly. How do you explain that?
Well, confirmation bias might be at play here. Remember those rose-colored glasses we talked about earlier?
We see what we want to see, basically.
Yeah. If someone believes in astrology and reads a description that seems to resonate, they're likely to see it as accurate, even if it's just a vague description that could apply to anyone.
So it's not about objective truth, but about how we interpret the information to fit our existing beliefs.
Right. It's like those personality quizzes. They label everyone as a free spirit or a leader, and most people will find something they relate to.
Exactly. Same with the zodiac signs. They offer these broad archetypes that are easy to project yourself onto.
Okay, but what about personalized horoscopes? Those are based on a person's unique birth chart, right?
True. Those go beyond just sun signs. They consider all the planets. But they still face the same criticism from the scientific community.
Like no real evidence to support it, and the possibility of confirmation bias.
Exactly. Plus, astrological predictions, even the personalized ones, they're often so vague.
Yeah, open to interpretation.
Exactly. If a prediction doesn't come true, it can be explained away as a misinterpretation or blamed on other astrological factors.
So it's hard to disprove, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, you believe something will happen, and you might subconsciously act in ways that make it more likely to occur.
That's interesting. The Al Jazeera article talks about the concept of karma from Buddhism and Hinduism. That idea that our actions have consequences that shape our future.
Oh, that's a really fascinating connection.
Yeah, maybe this desire to know the future, maybe it stems from that need to understand cause and effect, to feel like we have some control over our destiny.
Makes sense. When things are tough, looking for patterns and explanations can be comforting, even if those explanations aren't scientifically proven.
So we've got the history, the scientific skepticism, and the psychological and spiritual reasons people might be drawn to astrology. But let's be real, a lot of people just see it as a fun way to think about themselves and their relationships.
Totally. I mean, who hasn't checked their daily horoscope just for kicks? It's not always about taking it super seriously.
Like reading a fortune cookie. Sometimes it's surprisingly accurate, sometimes it's way off. But either way, it's entertaining.
Yeah. Plus, some people use astrology for self-reflection. Maybe reading about their zodiac sign helps them understand themselves better.
True. Becoming more self-aware is always a good thing.
Right. But it's key to remember that astrology is just one perspective. It shouldn't define who we are or limit our potential.
Exactly. We're far more complex than any horoscope could capture.
Agreed. So, where are we now? We've talked origins, claims, evidence, or lack thereof, the psychology behind it, and its entertainment value. But the big question remains, is astrology real?
The million-dollar question.
Question that's been debated for centuries, and one we might not fully answer in this deep dive.
But I think we've given our listeners a lot to consider.
Definitely. What are your thoughts so far? Do you buy into any of this?
That's a tough one. I think it's fascinating, and I can see the appeal, but I'm still leaning towards the skeptical side.
Makes sense. I mean, the lack of scientific evidence is hard to ignore.
But there's a part of me that wants to believe there's something more to it.
That's the thing with astrology. It taps into that sense of wonder and mystery. It suggests that there might be forces at play that we don't fully understand yet.
The Al Jazeera article talks about how some people see astrology as a way to connect with their higher self.
Oh, interesting. What does that even mean?
I guess it's about more than just predicting events. It's about understanding your spiritual purpose, your place in the grand scheme of things.
So a more spiritual dimension to astrology.
Yeah, it's the idea that your birth chart isn't just a random arrangement of planets, but a map of your soul's journey.
Okay, I can see how that would appeal to people seeking spiritual guidance. But how does this higher self idea fit with the more practical aspects of astrology, like relationships and career paths?
I think the belief is that by understanding your birth chart and the astrological influences at play, you can make choices that align with your soul's purpose.
So it's not about fate or destiny, but about using astrology as a tool for personal growth.
Yeah, empowering yourself to make choices that lead to greater fulfillment and happiness.
That's a more positive spin on it. But skeptics would probably argue it's just wishful thinking.
True. But is there harm in exploring these ideas, even if we don't take them literally?
That's a good question. I think if it sparks curiosity, encourages self-reflection, and maybe even provides a bit of fun, then why not?
So we're not saying everyone should become an astrology expert, but if you're intrigued, go ahead and explore.
Exactly. And who knows, you might learn something about yourself in the process, even if it's just a better understanding of your own beliefs and biases.
Speaking of beliefs and biases, The Echo has an interesting article about using astrology to understand neurodiversity, particularly autism.
Oh, really? That's a unique perspective.
Yeah, the author, who is autistic, describes using astrology as a tool to better understand human behavior and emotions, which they find challenging due to their neurodiversity.
So for them, it's not about literal predictions, but about using astrology as a framework for navigating social interactions.
Right. It's about finding ways to decode those unspoken rules and patterns of communication that can be difficult for neurodivergent people.
That's a really interesting take. It highlights the fact that astrology can have different meanings and values for different people.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that we shouldn't dismiss something outright just because it doesn't fit within a conventional scientific paradigm.
Right. There are multiple ways of knowing and understanding the world. Personal experience and subjective meaning can be just as valuable as objective truth.
Which brings us back to that fundamental question. Is astrology real? I mean, we've explored the arguments, but it seems like the answer might depend on how we define real.
Right. If we're talking scientifically verifiable, the evidence isn't there. But if we're talking about a system of belief that provides meaning, guidance, and self-awareness, then its realness is more subjective and personal.
So in the end, it boils down to personal belief and what resonates with each individual.
Yeah, I think that's a fair conclusion.
But some people argue believing in astrology is harmful, that it can lead to bad decisions or avoiding responsibility for your life.
It's important to remember that we should never use astrology as an excuse for inaction or blame external forces for our problems.
It's not about saying, oh, it's Mercury retrograde, that's why my life is a mess.
Exactly. We always have the power to make choices. Astrology should empower us, not take away our agency.
So it's a tool for self-awareness, not a crutch or a scapegoat.
Right. And that's a crucial message, especially in a world where it's easy to get caught up in quick fixes and external validation.
But despite the potential pitfalls, what are the positive aspects of engaging with astrology, even if you don't fully buy into it?
Well, there's something to be said for the power of ritual and symbolism. Astrology, with its signs, planets, houses, it offers this rich tapestry of symbols that can spark imagination and connect us to something bigger than ourselves.
Like a language of the soul, almost.
Exactly. And even if we don't take the literal meanings of those symbols, they can still evoke powerful emotions and insights.
It's interesting how astrology has permeated pop culture. We see it in memes, movies, even product advertising.
Right. It's become this shared language to talk about ourselves, relationships, hopes, fears.
And that speaks to its enduring appeal, even in a world increasingly driven by science and technology.
Absolutely. It taps into our human need for meaning, connection, and wonder.
Okay, so we've gone from ancient origins to modern manifestations, explored claims, criticisms, psychology, and even pop culture.
And through it all, I think we've shown that astrology is complex and multifaceted. It defies easy answers.
Totally agree, but we're not done yet, right?
Yeah. You got it. There are still some loose ends to tie up.
Like what?
We've addressed the skepticism, the lack of scientific proof, but what about the countless people who say astrology has worked for them? How do we account for those experiences?
Yeah, it's easy to just brush it off as coincidence or wishful thinking.
But what if there's more to it than that? What if there are forces at work that we just don't fully grasp yet?
I mean, science is constantly evolving, right? What we consider impossible today might be proven true tomorrow.
Exactly. There are still so many mysteries in the universe, things we haven't even begun to understand.
And maybe astrology, even if it's not a science in the traditional sense, maybe it's tapping into something real, something that's beyond our current ability to measure or explain.
It's like intuition, you know? Sometimes you just have a feeling about something and it turns out to be right, even if you can't logically explain why.
I totally get that. I think that's part of the reason why astrology remains so popular, even in our increasingly scientific and technological world.
It speaks to that part of us that yearns for mystery, for connection to something bigger than ourselves.
It's like a reminder that we don't have all the answers.
And that's okay. It's okay to embrace the unknown, to acknowledge that there might be more to reality than what we can currently perceive or prove.
It's interesting, this whole debate about astrology, it kind of reflects these bigger conversations about science, belief, and the nature of truth.
Yeah, I see what you mean. On one hand, we have the scientific method, which has been incredibly successful in advancing our understanding of the physical world.
It's given us amazing things, medicine, technology, a deeper understanding of the universe itself.
But it's also limited in a way, it can't explain everything, especially those aspects of human experience that are more subjective and intangible.
Like spirituality, intuition, the search for meaning.
Right, those things that can't be easily measured or quantified.
In astrology, in a way, it tries to bridge that gap. It offers a framework for understanding those more intangible aspects of our lives.
It provides a language for those things that might be beyond our current scientific understanding.
It's not about saying, this is definitely true because science says so, but rather, this resonates with me. It helps me make sense of my experiences, and that's valuable.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging that there are multiple ways of knowing and understanding the world, and that personal experience and subjective truth are just as valid as objective facts.
That brings us back to the idea of astrology as a tool for self-reflection and personal growth, even if we don't take every claim literally.
Right. It's about using it as a lens to examine our own beliefs, our values, our motivations.
Maybe to gain a deeper understanding of our strengths and weaknesses, our patterns, our tendencies.
Absolutely. It can be a way of connecting with our inner selves, exploring our potential, and making choices that align with what truly matters to us.
Wow, I think we've come full circle in our exploration of astrology. We've covered its history, its claims, the criticisms, the psychological and spiritual appeal, and even its role in popular culture.
And through it all, I hope we've encouraged our listeners to think critically, to approach the world with an open mind and a sense of curiosity.
Absolutely. Because whether you believe in it or not, astrology offers a fascinating window into human nature, our longing for meaning, our search for connection, and our enduring fascination with the cosmos.
Well said. It's a reminder that there's still so much we don't know, and that's okay.
So instead of asking, is astrology real? Maybe a better question is, what role does astrology play in our lives, and what does that tell us about ourselves?
It's a question we each need to answer for ourselves. There's no right or wrong answer. It's about finding what resonates with you, what helps you make sense of your own journey.
And with that, I think we can wrap up our deep dive into the world of astrology.
It's been a fascinating journey.
And that wraps up today's episode of the Deep Dive Podcast. What do you think about astrology? Do you believe it's an ancient science, or is it just fun and games? Let us know in the comments.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. Do you follow your horoscope, or are you skeptical about it? Drop your comments below.
Before we sign off, we just want to wish all of you a Happy New Year 2025. May this year be filled with joy, clarity, and exciting new discoveries.
Here's to an amazing 2025. Thanks for tuning in, and we can't wait to dive deep with you again very soon.
See you next time and have a fantastic new year.
See you next time, and have a fantastic new year.